Okay, everybody, this is Mr. Bloom here. Today we're going to review the 7 basic constitutional principles. First we will list them, and then we will go through each of the 7 principles in more depth and detail. Alright, so the 7 basic constitutional principles are principles that are central to the document. They're really at the heart of the Constitution. Let's go through them. The first is popular sovereignty. Next, limited government, federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review. Now that we've listed the 7 principles, let's talk about a few of them. For me, one of the more major important ones is this one right here, limited government. The next 3, federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances, I really want you to think of those in terms of those are things that are placed into the Constitution as a way of accomplishing this second one here, limited government, as achieving it. So, for example, federalism was put into the Constitution as a way to limit government. Same with separation of powers and checks and balances. We're going to go through each of the 7 principles now. Okay, so we said the first principle is popular sovereignty. Popular, you might recognize that word, like from population, or when something's popular, it means it has to do with people. Sovereignty, meaning power. So the idea is here that the people are the power. Our government has its power because the people agree to obey it. The people are the ones who created it and gave it all of the powers that it has. Therefore, the people are the ones truly with the power. This idea that the people are the true source of governmental power is clearly visible in the United States Constitution. Can you think about where you might see this principle located in the Constitution? It's located in the preamble. The preamble is like the introduction or the introductory paragraph to the Constitution, and it starts with 3 small words, "We the people." But those 3 little words tell us so much about our country and its government. As you can see in this original copy of the U.S. Constitution, the first 3 words are at the very top there, and they're very big. And I think the Founding Fathers did that for a very clear purpose, and that's to show the people that they are the ones with the true power and the real power behind this government. If you take a look at the text of the preamble, which I have up here, you'll notice the words in blue. The people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, and then you'll see some of the reasons why they did the things that they did or created this government in red. Establish justice, for domestic tranquility, common defense, promoting the general welfare, just as a few, outlining some of the basic fundamental purposes and jobs of our government. There's no finer way to we see popular sovereignty in action than every November. In November, we have Election Day. Just last year in 2012, we had an election for president, and on both parties, Democrats and Republicans, various people wished to become the president or the person representing their party in the race for president. Well, through a series of elections, the people spoke. People came out and voted in various primaries and eliminated the choices until we were down to Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. And on Election Day, the Americans voted and they chose Barack Obama to be their president. And this shows that people are truly the ones behind the government and its power. Neither Mitt Romney or Barack Obama or any of the faces on this screen could have become president without getting the votes from the people. Our next constitutional principle is that of limited government. The Founding Fathers, as we've discussed in class, was very much concerned about a strong, powerful federal government, and therefore they went to great lengths to make sure that the powers of this new government would be limited. Another way to think about limited government is the idea that there are just certain things that the government can't do. It's not free to do anything that it wants at any time or any place. One area of the Constitution that contains some of the things that the government is not allowed to do is within the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights lists some of America's most basic rights and freedoms that are guaranteed. Since they're guaranteed, it means no one can interfere with them, not even the federal government. Things like our speech, the right to practice our own religion, bearing arms, protection against warrants and unreasonable searches and seizures, right to a speedy trial, double jeopardy. These are just a few of the things and areas that are protected from government interference or involvement. The next constitutional principle is federalism. Federalism is a very important principle, and it's often a topic that's asked about on the United States History and Government Regents exam in June. Federalism is the system of government in which powers are divided between the federal government and the 50 state governments. In our country, we have a federal government and state governments, and they both operate simultaneously. The Constitution helps to tell us which government is responsible for which jobs. For example, the federal government is in charge of declaring war, while states have control over things like school calendars. Perhaps you may know some of your friends who live in other states that end school in May and begin school in early August. Since we have these two levels of government working at the same time, it is understood that the national government and national laws shall be supreme to state laws. And since the Constitution is the most important law in our land, it is to be treated as the supreme law of the land, which means no person or government official or even state official is above the Constitution. Now, as we've seen so far in this lecture and in our discussions in class, the Founding Fathers were very concerned about giving the federal government too much power. And with the Constitutional Convention, it was decided the federal government's power needed to be increased. But it still needed to have protections against abuses. And one of the ways that the Constitution protects us against potential abuses of power is by separating the federal government's power into three separate branches. Branches that are equal and independent of one another. And they are the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch's main function is to make the laws, federal laws in the United States. The main function of the executive branch is to carry out and execute laws. The main function of the judicial branch is that they interpret what the laws mean and what they don't mean. Let's go through that again. The legislative branch, Congress, which can be found in the Capitol building pictured here. And again, their main function is to make laws. The executive branch, which is made up of the President and the White House. Of course, this is the White House pictured here. And the President's main job is to enforce laws in the United States. The judicial branch and the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. This is a picture of the Supreme Court building here. And the federal courts, or the judicial branch's main function, is to interpret the laws in the United States, both federal and state laws. The next constitutional principle is checks and balances. Checks and balances is the system that's been put into the Constitution that allows each of the three branches the ability to check or block or restrain the actions of the other branches. This is done in an effort to prevent one branch from using its constitutionally delegated powers in an abusive fashion. As we've seen, the legislative branch, or the Congress, makes the laws in the United States, and an example of checks and balances would be the executive branch, or the president, vetoing one of the bills that has been passed by Congress in an effort to block it. In this diagram, you can see some of the various different ways that each of the three branches can check or block the power of another branch. We'll study this in more depth and detail over the next couple of days in class. But as you can see, some of the things besides vetoing of bills are things like pardoning criminals, declaring laws unconstitutional, impeachment, and approval of judges, just to name a few. The next constitutional principle is the principle of judicial review. This is a principle that belongs only to the judicial branch. Judicial review gives the judicial branch the power to review federal laws and state laws and determine whether or not they are constitutional. If the judicial branch finds that a federal or state law is in violation of the Constitution, it'll be ruled unconstitutional. Judicial review is actually a principle that's not contained within the Constitution. This is a principle that was created in a very famous Supreme Court case, Marbury v. Madison of 1803. Not only was this principle created by the Supreme Court in its decision in that case, but it also exercised its power of judicial review for the very first time in that case. Our final constitutional principle is that of flexibility. The Constitution was made to be a flexible document so that it can change over time. The Founding Fathers very wisely knew that they were making not only a constitution for now, but also one for the future. Therefore, they understood that this document would need to be able to adapt and change as times and situations required. There are three common ways in which the Constitution can be changed. The first is through amendments. Congress can pass amendments to change the Constitution, and if these amendments have been passed by both houses of Congress, they then must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Our Constitution has been amended or changed 27 times in its history. The next, as we stated a few minutes ago, is judicial review. When the Supreme Court makes a ruling in its case, it is helping to define the very meaning of the Constitution. So in a ruling, the Supreme Court will help us to better understand what sort of things the Constitution allows for and what sort of things it doesn't. The final way in which the Constitution can be flexible or adapt is through the use of the elastic clause. The legislative branch has this special power which allows it to stretch its powers beyond what is actually stated in the Constitution, thus giving it the ability to stretch its power to meet the times as change require. Alright everybody, that sums it up for our video today on constitutional principles. This is meant to give you an overview of them, and over the next few days we will study specific uses of how these constitutional principles are put into action in our country. Alright, so that's it, and we'll see everybody in class.